I didn't realize my life was changing that morning. Not in a dramatic way. No alarms, no shouting. Just a quiet moment that settled deep in my chest and stayed there. Have you ever felt that? That strange calm before you understand something important has already slipped away from you? My name is Michael Harper, and for 15 years I gave my best years to Northridge Industries. I remember my first day clearly. The factory floors smelled like oil and hot steel. Machines screamed louder than people. Everyone walked fast, heads down, pretending they knew what they were doing. The truth was simpler. The company was bleeding money. Systems were broken. Reports didn't match reality. Leadership sat on the top floor, far away from the noise, convinced everything was under control. I was young then, hungry. I believed hard work still mattered. I worked quietly. That was my mistake. Late nights became normal. I'd sit alone under flickering fluorescent lights, staring at spreadsheets no one else wanted to open. Data told stories if you listened long enough. I listened. I found inefficiencies, bottlenecks, waste hiding in simple sight. I wrote process improvement plans, clean, detailed, measurable. I sent them up the chain and waited. Nothing happened. When the first promotion cycle came, my manager smiled at me in that careful way people do when they're about to disappoint you. "Next time, Michael." I nodded. I told myself patience was strength. The second time hurt more. The third time felt personal. By the fifth, I stopped telling my wife about it. By the seventh, I started questioning myself in the mirror. Was I invisible? Or was I simply too useful where I was? Names started to repeat themselves. Adam Wilson, smooth talker, loud laugh. He loved meetings more than results. Jack Morris, confident, well-dressed, always ready with a slide deck built from other people's work, my work. I watched them present my ideas like they were born knowing them. Same charts, same language, same conclusions. My name never appeared at the bottom, only theirs. I stayed calm on the outside. Inside, something tightened every time. The moment that truly broke me didn't arrive with anger. It arrived with silence. It was a strategy meeting. Big table, glass walls, executives sipping coffee they didn't finish. I sat halfway down, notebook closed, listening. Rebecca Stewart, head of finance, stood up. She smiled as if she was about to congratulate a child. "This turnaround idea," she tapped the screen, "was presented by Adam. Excellent leadership." Adam nodded modestly. Jack smirked. I was sitting right there. 10 times, 10 broken promises, 10 stolen acknowledgments, and still no one looked at me. Not Richard Hale, the CEO, not Rebecca, not Adam, not Jack. It was as if I had become part of the furniture. Have you ever been erased while standing in the room? Something went cold inside me. Not hot, not explosive. Cold, sharp, controlled. In that moment, I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't defend myself. I did something far more dangerous. I made a decision. If they couldn't see my value, they would feel the cost of losing it. That day, I walked back to my desk like nothing had happened. I answered emails. I smiled when spoken to. Even I helped Adam fix a mistake in his presentation before the board review. He thanked me casually, like you thank a machine. But inside, a clock had started ticking. For the next 6 months, I did my job exactly as expected, no less, no more. Quietly, methodically, I began to observe everything. I mapped systems, dependencies, client touchpoints, who relied on whom, what broke when one person stepped away. And then I noticed something important. The company's largest client, Steel Flow Logistics, didn't trust reports. They didn't trust dashboards. They trusted people. One person. Me. I had built that relationship over years. Late-night calls, crisis management, honest conversations when things went wrong. Adam and Jack had titles, but no trust. They didn't even have Steel Flow's direct numbers. That's when I understood the truth no one else had realized yet. I wasn't just an employee. I was a keystone. I began organizing my files, cleaning my documentation, transferring nothing, training no one beyond surface-level knowledge. I updated my resume at home, late at night after my family slept.
When the offer letter came from another firm, I signed it without hesitation. No drama, no warning. Still, no one noticed. When I finally resigned, Richard Hale leaned back in his chair and smiled. "We won't try to stop you, Michael." That smile told me everything. As I walked out for the last time, I wondered how long would it take before they realized what they had dismissed. And more importantly, when people finally notice your absence, is it already too late to fix what they broke? If you were in my place, would you have spoken up, or would you have waited like I did for the silence to do the talking?
I noticed the change before anyone else did. Not because alarms went off or people started shouting, but because silence started to feel heavier. Have you ever been in a place where everything looks the same, yet something invisible has shifted, like the air before a storm? After that meeting, the one where Rebecca praised Adam for my work, time slowed down for me. Days still passed, emails still came in, meetings still filled calendars. But inside my head, everything became sharp, focused, controlled. I stopped hoping. Hope is dangerous in places like that. It keeps you waiting. It keeps you loyal to people who have already decided who you are allowed to be. Instead, I started watching. I watched how Adam spoke in meetings, confident, loud, never precise. I watched how Jack nodded along, adding nothing but collecting credit anyway. I watched Richard Hale sit at the head of the table, hands folded, listening just enough to believe he was still in control. And I watched myself. I noticed how often people came to my desk quietly, not officially, not in emails. They came when things broke, when numbers didn't match, when clients were angry, when systems failed. They came because they knew something no org chart showed. I was the one who fixed things. That realization didn't make me proud. It made me careful. From that moment on, every action I took had a second purpose. I still solved problems, but I paid attention to how those problems were connected. I mapped workflows in my head. If this process failed, who panicked first? If that report was delayed, whose reputation took the hit? I began to understand the company like a living body, and I saw exactly where it was fragile. At night, lying awake, I asked myself questions I had avoided for years. Why was I still there? What was I really afraid of? Starting over? Losing stability? Or admitting that loyalty had cost me more than it ever gave back? 6 months. That's how long it took to prepare. Not because I was slow, but because I was patient. During those months, Steel Flow Logistics called more often. Their operations director trusted me. He didn't sugarcoat problems. He didn't play politics. When shipments were delayed, he wanted answers, not excuses. I gave him both truth and solutions. One evening, after a particularly tense call, he said something that stayed with me. "Michael," he said, "I don't know how this company would function without you." I thanked him. Calm voice, neutral tone. Inside, a final piece clicked into place. That night, I opened my laptop and didn't look at Northridge files. I opened a blank document. I started writing my future instead. Experience, achievements, results. All the things that had never been spoken out loud inside those glass walls. Interviews followed. Quiet ones, confidential ones. I chose carefully. I wasn't running away. I was moving towards something better. Still, at work, nothing changed on the surface. Adam started acting more confident. Jack began talking about his vision for the next year. Rebecca pushed for aggressive forecasts that barely made sense. And Richard Hale? He smiled, always smiling. The kind of smile that says, everything is fine, even when it isn't. I wondered if any of them felt it yet, that faint pressure, that sense that something essential was slipping through their fingers. Probably not. People who have always taken credit rarely imagine what happens when the source disappears.
The offer letter arrived on a Thursday evening. Senior director, higher pay, real authority, respect written clearly into the role, not promised vaguely for later. I signed it slowly. No rush, no shaking hands, just certainty. The next morning, I walked into the office earlier than usual. I looked around longer than usual. The desks, the screens, the people rushing past without noticing me. I felt something unexpected. Relief. When I handed in my resignation, my manager looked stunned. He tried to hide it, but failed. He asked if there was anything they could do. I told him no. The meeting with Richard Hale was short, polite, empty. He leaned back, smiled, and said the words I would never forget. "We won't try to stop you, Michael." In that moment, I understood something important. They still didn't know. They thought I was replaceable, just another name, another role, another line on an org chart. I thanked him. I shook hands. I walked out. The countdown had begun. 3 weeks later, I received my first message. Not from HR, not from management, from a systems lead. "Hey, quick question. Do you remember how you handled the steel flow escalation protocol?" I stared at the screen. I didn't reply. More messages followed, subtle at first, then urgent, then desperate. Missed calls, emails marked high importance. Adam suddenly wanted to catch up. Jack asked if I'd be open to consulting, just temporarily. I ignored them all, because this wasn't anger. This wasn't revenge fueled by emotion. This was consequence. I sat in my new office, in a building where people looked me in the eye when they spoke, and I thought about Northridge Industries, about how long it would take before the cracks became visible to everyone. And I wondered, when the foundation of a system is removed quietly, how long does it take before the whole structure starts to shake? If you were watching from the outside, would you step in to help them? Or would you wait just a little longer to see how much damage silence can do?
The first real crack didn't announce itself. It whispered. Have you ever noticed how systems don't fail loudly at first? They hesitate, they stutter, they miss a beat. That's how I knew it had begun. I was 3 weeks into my new role when the second message came. Not a question this time, a confession. "Michael, we're having trouble replicating the steel flow reporting cadence. Do you have time for a quick call?" I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop. In my new office, the walls were solid, not glass. People knocked before entering. When I spoke in meetings, others took notes. That contrast made the past feel distant, almost unreal. But Northridge hadn't let go of me yet. They couldn't. They just didn't know how to say it out loud. At Northridge, Adam was unraveling. I didn't hear that directly. I heard it through the pauses, the gaps, the tone shifts in messages forwarded to me by former colleagues who still trusted me. Adam's presentations had grown longer, but emptier. Jack started interrupting more, trying to steer conversations away from details. Rebecca's forecasts were suddenly cautious, padded with assumptions she couldn't defend. And steel flow? They had stopped smiling. The operations director called me on my personal phone one evening. No greeting, no small talk. "Michael, what's going on over there?" I chose my words carefully. Truth without betrayal. "I don't work there anymore." Silence stretched, heavy, then a slow exhale. "That explains a lot," he said. He told me shipments were delayed, numbers didn't align, responses were slow. When problems escalated, no one seemed to understand the full picture. He had asked for me by name. They told him I'd moved on. "I trusted you," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. "I know," I replied. That night, I lay awake thinking about trust, how fragile it is, how expensive it becomes once it's broken. Northridge had built its biggest relationship on my credibility, then treated that credibility like it belonged to the company, not the person who earned it.
Time was ticking now, and they could feel it. A week later, the messages changed tone. We're under pressure. Audit flagged inconsistencies. Production missed another deadline. No greetings, no pleasantries, just urgency. Adam called. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. Jack emailed, subject line, quick favor. I deleted it. Rebecca sent a calendar invite for a brief alignment discussion. I declined. You see, this wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. For the first time in 15 years, my time belonged to me. Inside Northridge, panic began dressing itself up as strategy. They hired consultants, expensive ones, people with sharp suits and louder voices. The consultants asked the same questions I'd answered years ago. They recommended changes I had already implemented, quietly, efficiently, without applause. But now, without context, those changes clashed with existing processes. Fixes created new problems. Richard Hale called an emergency leadership meeting. Adam tried to explain delays without naming causes. Jack blamed supply chains. Rebecca blamed market volatility. No one blamed the absence of institutional memory. No one said my name. That's the thing about denial. It works best when everyone agrees to participate. Meanwhile, Steelflow issued a formal notice. Not termination yet, a warning. Improve performance or risk contract review. The largest client, the one holding everything together. I knew what would happen next. I'd known it for months. The call came on a Friday afternoon. Michael, Richard Hale said, his voice tighter than I remembered, we'd like to explore a short-term consulting arrangement. I pictured him sitting in that chair, leaned back, hands folded, the same smile, now forced. I'm not available, I said. A pause, longer than comfortable. We're prepared to compensate generously. It was almost funny. Almost. I'm happy where I am, I replied. And I meant it. After the call, my hands didn't shake, my heart didn't race. There was no rush of triumph, just a quiet sense of inevitability. This was never about revenge in the way people imagine it. No shouting, no exposure, no dramatic takedown. This was about absence. Remove the keystone and the arch doesn't fall immediately. It waits, it creaks, it convinces itself it's fine. Until one day, gravity does what gravity always does. A month later, Steelflow terminated the contract. That news spread fast, faster than truth usually does. Stock dipped, meetings multiplied, emails turned frantic. Rebecca's reports failed audits because assumptions replaced understanding. Adam's confidence collapsed under questions he couldn't answer. Jack stopped talking about vision altogether. And me? I focused on my new team. I built systems that didn't depend on a single person. I documented everything. I made myself replaceable on purpose. Because real leadership isn't about being indispensable. It's about making sure no one has to clean up your silence later. One evening, as I shut down my computer, I thought about Northridge Industries, about all the moments they'd dismissed, all the warnings they ignored, all the chances they had to simply say, "We see you." They were learning now, slowly, painfully, and I wondered something that still stays with me. When people finally understand your value only after you're gone, is that justice or just a lesson they were always meant to learn the hard way? If you were watching this unfold, knowing what was coming next, would you feel sorry for them? Or would you call this the fairest outcome of all?
The collapse didn't happen all at once. That's what most people get wrong. They imagine revenge as a single moment, a headline, a dramatic fall. But real consequences move differently. They arrive in waves, quiet at first, then impossible to stop. By the time Steelflow officially walked away, Northridge Industries was already limping. The contract termination didn't cause the damage, it revealed it. Like turning on the lights in a room that's been falling apart in the dark. I heard about it on a Tuesday morning, not from the news, not from Richard, from an old colleague who still checked in occasionally. "They're in emergency mode," he said. "Meetings all day, no answers." I pictured the boardroom, the same glass walls, the same long table. But now the confidence was gone. Now every sentence probably ended with uncertainty. Now every plan came with a backup, and a backup for the backup. This is where the pressure started doing strange things to people. Adam Wilson stopped pretending he had everything under control. He became defensive, short-tempered. He interrupted questions instead of answering them. When numbers didn't line up, he blamed teams. When timelines slipped, he blamed vendors. He never blamed himself. Jack Morris did the opposite. He went quiet, too quiet. The man who once loved to hear his own voice suddenly avoided speaking unless asked directly. He stayed late not to fix problems, but to be seen staying late. Optics instead of outcomes. Rebecca Stewart tried to rebuild certainty with spreadsheets, more data, more projections, more assumptions stacked on top of assumptions. But audits don't care about confidence. They care about consistency, and consistency was gone. Richard Hale still smiled. That part amazed me the most. Some leaders mistake calm for strength. They believe that if they look unbothered, reality will follow their lead. But calm without understanding is just denial wearing a suit. Calls kept coming, not directly to me anymore, to my voicemail, to my inbox, through people I barely knew. Just a quick question. 5 minutes, that's all. Off the record. I ignored them all. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish anyone personally, but because answering would have erased the lesson. It would have allowed them to believe the system still worked, that they could neglect people, extract value, and fix everything with a phone call when it finally broke. Some lessons only land when silence holds. Inside my new role, I was building something different. Meetings where credit was shared, systems where knowledge didn't live inside one person's head, teams where questions were encouraged before problems became emergencies. It felt strange at first. Almost uncomfortable. I had spent so long being invisible that being heard felt unfamiliar. One afternoon, during a routine review, my new CEO looked at me and said, "This works because you designed it, not because you're here every minute." That sentence stayed with me. At North Ridge, the opposite was now painfully clear. Without me, processes that once seemed automatic required explanation. Without context, decisions became guesses. Without trust, clients questioned every delay. And once trust starts cracking, it spreads faster than any failure. Another former colleague reached out. "Richard's under pressure from the board," he said. "They're asking how this happened." I already knew the answer. It happened slowly, it happened quietly, and it happened because people confused loyalty with silence and competence with compliance. A month later, the internal audit results leaked, not publicly, internally, enough to cause panic. Revenue forecasts revised downward, expansion plans paused, hiring frozen. Morale dropped fast when people realized leadership didn't actually understand the systems they were responsible for. Adam stopped coming in early. Jack started updating his LinkedIn profile. Rebecca requested external validation for every major decision. And Richard Hale finally stopped smiling. That was the moment I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, sadness. Because this could have been avoided. A conversation, a recognition, a single moment of honesty years ago. But pride is expensive, and denial charges interest. The final call came late one evening. "Michael," Richard said. "No greeting this time, just my name. We made mistakes." I waited. We should have listened. Silence sat between us, heavy, uncomfortable. "I hope you're doing well," he added. "I am," I said, and again I meant it. We hung up without resolution, without closure. Sometimes there isn't any. Weeks later, the announcement went internal first, then public. Richard Hale was stepping down. Officially, it was framed as a strategic transition. Unofficially, everyone knew why. Leadership had failed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Adam resigned shortly after. Jack followed. Rebecca stayed, but her authority never fully recovered. Northridge Industries didn't collapse entirely. Companies rarely do. They shrink, they restructure, they survive. Wounded, cautious, changed. And me? I didn't celebrate. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell the story to anyone who didn't ask, because this was never about watching them fall. It was about walking away when staying meant disappearing. As I looked out of my office window one evening, city lights flickering below, a thought crossed my mind. When people lose everything because they ignored the one thing holding it together, is that revenge or simply the natural order restoring balance? If you had been in my place, watching the consequences unfold from a distance, would you have felt victory, or would you have felt the weight of knowing it never had to end this way? By the time the fallout became public, the story had already been rewritten by people who needed to survive it. That's how these things usually end up. Facts softened, timelines blurred, responsibility diluted. But inside the walls of Northridge Industries, everyone knew the truth. They just didn't say it out loud. I watched from a distance, not out of fear, not out of pride, but because distance changes how you see things. When you're no longer inside the storm, patterns become obvious. You see where the wind shifted first. You see which walls were already weak. The board didn't remove Richard Hale overnight. First came oversight, then advisory support, then closed-door meetings that ran long and ended quietly. People walked out avoiding eye contact. Conversations stopped when someone new entered the room. Uncertainty is contagious. Rebecca tried to regain control. She worked harder than her, longer hours, more reports, more reviews. But effort can't replace understanding. The numbers still didn't align. Auditors kept asking the same questions, and each time the answers came slower. Adam lasted longer than I expected. He fought, not for solutions, but for perception. He tried to frame the collapse as bad timing, market conditions, external pressure, anything except the obvious. But when SteelFlow left, they didn't just take revenue. They took confidence. Other clients started asking questions, not aggressively, politely, carefully, the way people do when they're already considering alternatives. Jack was the first to prepare his exit quietly. He didn't announce anything, he just stopped committing, stopped promising. He shifted responsibility wherever possible. That's what people do when they sense a structure failing. They look for doors. I received one last message from an old teammate. They're arguing about who knew what, about when. That told me everything. When accountability becomes a debate, trust is already gone. In my new role, I was in a very different meeting. Same concept, different energy. The discussion wasn't about who to blame, it was about what to fix. People spoke honestly, sometimes bluntly, sometimes imperfectly, but always openly. I realized then how much tension I had been carrying for years without noticing, the constant self-editing, the careful silence, the unspoken fear of being seen as difficult just for telling the truth. That weight was gone. One afternoon, my assistant handed me a printed article. Northridge Industries. Leadership transition, restructuring plan, strategic refocus. I read it slowly. There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement, no credit. And strangely, I felt relieved. Because recognition that comes too late isn't recognition. It's regret trying to save face. A week later, the call I didn't expect came through. It wasn't Richard, it wasn't Rebecca, it was Adam. His voice was different, quieter, less polished. I wanted to apologize, he said, for how things went. I waited. You all benefited from your work, he continued, and we didn't give you what you deserved. It wasn't a full confession, but it was close. I appreciate you saying that, I replied. There was nothing else to add. Apologies don't rebuild years, they just acknowledge them. After the call, I sat alone for a long time, thinking about ambition,
about systems that reward visibility over value, about how often the most important people are the least protected. This wasn't revenge in the way movies sell it. There was no moment of triumph, no dramatic confrontation, no speech where everything clicked into place. The payoff was quieter. Peace. Clarity. The knowledge that I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into a structure that never planned to grow around me. Northridge stabilized eventually, smaller, more cautious, less confident. They learned the lesson the hard way and paid full price for it. And me? I finally understood something I wish I had known earlier. Loyalty without respect is just slow self-erasure. As I prepared notes for a presentation later that evening, I caught my reflection in the glass. Calm, focused, present. Not waiting to be chosen, not hoping to be seen. I had already moved on. But one thought lingered. When people only realize your value after losing it, is it your responsibility to return, or your responsibility to never put yourself back in that position again? If you had reached this point, standing where I stood now, would you look back one last time? Or would you close the door completely and never check who was knocking again?
The final chapter didn't arrive with fireworks. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting, no triumphant announcements. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that hums in the office long after the last phone call is ignored, long after the last spreadsheet has been misread, long after the chaos begins to settle like dust. That's when I realized my revenge had never been about spectacle. It was about presence, or the absence of it. I sat in my new office, the city lights flickering beyond the glass, and thought about Northridge Industries. About 15 years of my life, building things no one valued, watching others take credit for my work, waiting for recognition that never came. And now, finally, everything they depended on was exposed as fragile. Not because of my actions, but because I had quietly walked away. Richard Hale was gone. Adam Wilson had resigned. Jack Morris had vanished from the leadership roster. Rebecca Stewart stayed, but she carried the weight of mistakes she hadn't caused. The company didn't crumble completely, but it was scarred. That was the point. They had learned the cost of underestimating the person holding everything together. I could have gone back. I could have stepped in, taken control, corrected the chaos. But that wasn't my lesson to teach. My revenge wasn't about reclaiming power. It was about letting reality show them their mistake. And reality is far louder than any person's words. Sometimes the most powerful punishment isn't public humiliation. It isn't stealing what belongs to someone else. It's walking away, quietly, deliberately, and letting them understand what they lost. Letting them see that the foundation of their success was never what they thought. In those quiet moments, I reflected on what I had learned about human nature, ambition, and loyalty. People often confuse compliance with competence. They mistake visibility for value. They assume someone indispensable will stay forever. But the moment they take someone for granted, they set a timer on their own stability. I thought about my own choices, the patience I had shown, the meticulous planning, the restraint, the silence, the calm exterior while every day I quietly prepared for this moment. All of it had been necessary, not just to protect myself, but to allow the system to break in a way that couldn't be blamed on emotion or revenge fantasies. It broke because of truth. 6 months earlier, I was the invisible person in the room. Now I was the one who had walked out and observed, detached, as the very company I had built struggled without me. And I didn't gloat. I didn't relish their panic. I simply acknowledged the inevitability of it. There is a lesson there, one I hope anyone listening or reading can carry. Value yourself before anyone else does.
Protect your work, your reputation, your relationships. Understand the power of absence. Sometimes the most profound impact you can make isn't by showing strength, it's by showing restraint, by leaving quietly, deliberately, and watching the world adjust to the truth you always carried. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence fill the office. Peace doesn't feel dramatic, but it feels absolute. It's knowing you acted with precision, not passion, with clarity, not anger, with patience, not haste. And for the first time in years, I smiled without thought of recognition, without waiting, without compromise. Sometimes the ultimate revenge is invisible. It isn't loud. It isn't emotional. It isn't about taking. It's about walking away and finally letting them understand who really held everything together. If you were in my shoes now, looking back at years of being overlooked and underestimated, at all the times promises were broken, at all the moments you stayed silent while others took credit, would you step back in to correct what was lost, or would you close that door forever, knowing that the greatest lesson has already been taught?